tell you, we are really, really excited because we have waited years for this moment. We have had the State Department of Education represented by the Chief Deputy Superintendent, Mary Nicely. Jeff Bello has always been here. We have had other representatives of the department. And this year, like the stars aligned, I'm not actually sure why, but we actually have the man himself. And I just want to say it's such a treat because during all of the challenges with education, and especially in shelter in place and distance learning, it was like this immediate shock that all of our schools had, right? What being the leaders at your school site as the school leadership team, it was nothing to make that transition because already your students had devices that were going home. Already your teachers were doing the lessons that involved navigating the internet and using technology. Already the parents were trained and knew exactly what to do. It was still tough because at home, some of the students didn't have enough bandwidth. The families didn't have enough connectivity for all of the students. Not every student had a device, especially if they weren't in school to home, right? So that was a challenge, but immediately we began to have an additional kind of conversation with the superintendent and the State Department of Education. And I really appreciate that Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, immediately stepped up. And we had this continuing conversation and partnership, and now he's actually here. And this is Tony, the second time we've been able to be in person in a while. And as you know, during that arc of school to home, twice testing got interrupted. As you know, our commitment is to improving academic performance, not just the technology. The technology is just a tool. Clearly, I'm lobbying the superintendent right now. And we are really committed to working with the legislature to support the department in promoting what we know works, because that's what these educators do. You have a whole room of our school leadership teams. Basically, every school sends about 3 people, their principals, and then they choose a couple of other folks, and they've been working really, really hard. Tony comes to the job of being the state State Superintendent of Public Instruction with a background in education. He was on the West Contra Costa Unified School Board. That's how I first met you. And then he was in the legislature. And in the legislature, he also oversaw human services. And we talked a lot about the fact that you all have to not only educate as your mission is, but you've got all the challenges that your students who live in low-income communities face every day and their parents face. It takes a whole lot of overcoming that wall of poverty in order to do the mission of education. So at CETF, we're not just about school to home. We actually want to transform neighborhoods, and that's why Yoli Flores being here today with Families in Schools is so important to help us here in the Los Angeles region. Mr. Thurmond, as the Assembly member, also was the architect of a resolution about technology in schools. And then we got the whole pandemic, so we've had to take a different course. But it's really a pleasure to thank you, Superintendent Thurmond, to welcome you to School to Home, to say we're thrilled you're here, and to say come forward and preach the gospel. Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. You're welcome.
She said to preach the gospel. Mm-hmm. Are you going to do some preaching up in here? Good evening. Buenas noches. Thank you, Sunny, the Honorable Sunny McPeak. You know, Sunny said that as if she said She's lobbying me. When are you not lobbying Sonny?
It's my job.
It is your job, and you do it well on behalf of so many wonderful young people and families in our state. Another round of applause for Sonny McPeak. Thank you, Sonny. Long before we were talking about the digital divide in the context of the pandemic, Sonny was talking about these issues, that every student should have access to the internet, that every student should have a device, that every student and family should have digital literacy. So she is not a newcomer to these conversations. And thank you for your steadfast leadership. Thank you to T-Mobile. Thank you, Jeff. T-Mobile, my cell phone company. Jeff said me too. I sure hope so, Jeff. I'm going to call your folks. Trust but verify. No. During the pandemic, we were scrambling, literally scrambling on so many fronts. And at one point, the state had provided funds to every school district to be able to secure devices for students, but there weren't any devices, literally, in the world. There were no devices. And T-Mobile stepped forward with Apple and said that we will create this internet-embedded device at a very affordable cost for our students. And it was a brilliant moment. I have to say, T-Mobile was the only carrier to step forward with such an arrangement. And it's not been lost on me. And so thank you for that. Let's have a round of applause for T-Mobile. Plus, they get those cool Super Bowl commercials, I'm like, wait a minute, I won't be in one of those commercials. We're twinning tonight. You're just like, thank you all for what you do. It never should have been the case that California should experience a digital divide, ever. It's sad that it took a pandemic to really put a spotlight on the disparities that exist in the world, in our country, and even in California, the fourth wealthiest economy in the world, the home of Silicon Valley. There never should have been a time that our students would experience disconnection. But it took a pandemic to put a spotlight on that. As the pandemic, I'll never forget, it was Friday the 13th, right? Y'all remember? And as I ended my day talking to countless superintendents, they all said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? No one really knew what this thing was that would ultimately take 1 million lives. And every superintendent that I talked to across the state said, let's take a long spring break and shut down for a little bit. But that was on Friday. On Monday, we realized 1 million students were without a computer at home. We realized that at least 1 million students were without high-speed internet. And so when you look at the challenges that many of our students have been through, to me, it is no surprise. If the only way you can be connected to your educators is through a device in the internet and you don't have that, it is no surprise to me that the same learning gaps that we were trying to close before the pandemic grew and exacerbated, right? And I tell people all the time, if you look at test scores, and I don't think our kids are more than a test score. They really are. And there's many ways to measure learning. Now we're going to get preaching, right? Everybody's like, But it is the one way that we have to measure the impact and measure the outcome of what our students know, and especially students from low-income communities and students of color. For us to know how they're doing, we have to have some ability to measure. And so we've been trying to close gaps since before the pandemic. They were exacerbated during the pandemic. You saw the test scores that are released. There's a lot of work to be done for our students all across the country. But here's what's different about California. California has more resources than any other state as it relates to supporting learning, recovery, and accelerating learning for our students. During the pandemic, and I'm grateful to work with Sonny and others, Senator Lena Gonzalez, we sponsored legislation to provide $6 billion to California communities to have broadband all across our state. It took that's a great place to put your hands together. Applausa, come on, don't hold back. It shouldn't have, but it took a pandemic to generate the revenue to say that we can close the digital divide once and for all. When the pandemic started and we realized, I started hearing from families, they were calling me from places like PK and Ed Trust West, and they were saying this phenomena is happening. Kids are going home or they're not getting the packets and they don't have computers. And guess what? They were almost always black and brown kids or low-income kids who either didn't get the packet or didn't have access to a computer. And so they were struggling and they were falling behind. And so I declared that we were going to create the task force on closing the digital divide. And then we got creative. I sent a letter to the CEOs of all of the internet service providers, and I demanded that they appear before the state legislature and provide free internet to low-income families in the state of California. And they were scared. I didn't have to call T-Mobile. They came willingly. A lot of these companies refused to even show and talk about their commitment to supporting low-income families. What we learned is they already had a program in their portfolio that could provide low-cost internet for $15 a month, but they didn't want to promote it. What good is it to have something to serve low-income families and never promote it and never market it? They didn't want anybody to know, but it took the force of a task force in the spotlight in front of legislators and the public for them to say, we have this great program. And then they provided it. And then we found devices. We worked with manufacturers to find devices and get them in the hands of our students. And we delivered 1 million devices and hotspots to our students and low-cost internet for $15 a month and $6 billion in broadband. And so we have something to build on. You know, I always say our kids can't hotspot their way into the future, right? This is a state where we should be preparing young people to be engineers or to work in cybersecurity. This year, I'm sponsoring legislation that will create a computer science graduation requirement so our students will know not just coding, but be ready for all of the jobs. We always say the jobs of tomorrow, but to me, they're like the jobs of today. They're the jobs of right now. And our students are capable of leading these jobs. They will earn great wages while they're doing this work, and it's instinctual to them. It's natural to them. I have 2 daughters, and I would always get these new devices, and I would try to figure out how to use the device. And as young children, they would snatch it out of my hand and start doing things with the device. I thought they were breaking it. They're like, no, Dad, this is how it works. I call them the IT department. Right? Our young people know this technology instinctually, but we have to give them a foundation that will prepare them so that they can be the leaders of the jobs of tomorrow and the jobs of today. And it will make a difference for them in their life, financially, and that is part of the motivation for me. You know, as someone who grew up in this state, as the son of immigrants and the descendant of slaves, my grandparents came here my grandmother was born in San Andres, Colombia. And as a teenager, she emigrated to Panama, where she met my grandfather from Jamaica, where they raised their kids by cleaning houses. And when their daughter, my mom, came to the States, she was a teacher in San Jose. My dad was a Vietnam vet who I never saw until I found him after the war. I found my father on the internet before my 40th birthday. So my mom raised 4 kids by herself, and we struggled. And my mom was very sick. My mom had cancer. And when I was 6, she lost her battle to cancer. And my family entrusted me to her cousin, who I never met until I showed up on her doorstep. Another Panameña who raised us in her household, but we went without. I was raised on the free lunch program. All my friends made fun of me for eating the free lunch. I had an orange ticket like this. All my homies and partners were like making fun of me. And then I became an adult and I realized everybody in my neighborhood was on the free lunch program. And I'm like, what y'all fronting about? I went to the grocery store with food stamp coupons. I know y'all are too young to remember food stamp coupons. It's like today's EBT card, but it was in a coupon book that was stapled so tightly. When you ripped that coupon out, it felt like this. Boop, he's using food stamps on aisle number 7. Big old floodlights. You know, I don't know why we shame people in this country who are hungry, because we have enough resources to feed the whole world. That's why at the same time in the pandemic, we provided 900 million meals to California students, and I'm glad to have sponsored the legislation that guarantees universal meals, 2 free meals a day to every student, regardless of your background, your neighborhood, your zip code. And then we had this. I don't know if they served was there any cheese in your menu tonight? So, okay. In my household, we had a special delivery of government cheese. A box of cheese, the block. You heard the story. In that super thick plastic, you had to fight to get into it. She said, yes, we really in church now. Yes. Somebody like, you got any government cheese right now? The U.S. government has 1 billion pounds of government cheese holed up in a cave right now. I don't know what they're waiting for, like Armageddon or what. But in my household, we had to fight to get into that box. And if you got into that box and through that plastic, it might have been the best grilled cheese or quesadilla you ever had, right? Because when you hungry, we used to say that, we hungry, what we gonna eat? My auntie would say, God will provide. And God did in the form of government cheese and the free lunch program and food stamps. These were the programs that helped my family to overcome poverty and, of course, getting a great education. And we owe that to our 6 million students. So again, they can't hotspot their way through technology. They have to have fast technology that prepares them to lead in the ways that we need. And that foundation helped me to become a social worker and then to become elected and to be able to do the things that you heard Sonny McPeak talk about. We have big challenges ahead, but we have resources to make a difference. We have the $6 billion for broadband. We have $4 billion for after-school and expanded learning programs. We have $8 billion for what we call the Learning Recovery Block Program. We have a universal TK program where we can guarantee for every single 4-year-old that it is free to get early education, and Head Start, and preschool, and childcare. We have all the programs, and we have $500 million to make sure our kids learn to read. Where's Yoli? Yoli is our champion for literacy. Okay. I heard you say Yoli's name. She's a great friend. We have reading coaches and specialists to make sure our kids learn to read by 3rd grade so that we can educate and not incarcerate our kids and give them a chance at a life. Give them a chance at a life. Kids who read by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate and go on to great things. Those who don't learn to read are at higher risk for dropping out. Someone did a poll. 75% of those who are incarcerated right now talked about struggling with reading. Many who never got diagnosed for dyslexia and other learning disorders. And so these are things that we can prevent. And so there was a direct connection to technology. As you talked about, Sonny, we're all about how we help our students to accelerate learning. And that also means having great educators who can work with them. And we have a scholarship for anyone who would like to become a teacher or a mental health clinician. I have $20,000 for you right now. All you got to do is call me, 1-800, where you at, and I'll make sure you get that money. Just call me. Just put out the bat signal. I'll be there. It's teachingca at cde.ca.gov. And then you can join great educators like Dr. Francis Gibson, who was in the room. Yes. Where is Dr. Francis Gibson? Where is Dr. Francis Gibson, who's been helping us center our literacy programs, great educator. We want you all to become great educators like Dr. Francis Gibson and Renee Martinez and Daryl Stewart. Thank you, Dr. Gibson, for working with us on all kinds of literacy programs for our students that they learn how to read. And if anyone knows someone who wants to become a teacher or a mental health clinician, we've got the $20,000 scholarship for you. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for working with our families on digital literacy. Thank you for believing in kids that they can have a great future despite humble beginnings. It's been the narrative of my life. It is why I do what we do, and we can keep the promise of education for 6 million students and for 40 million Californians in the great state of California. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.